This fight is definitely a clash of styles. We have the great, Alexander the Great, that is, Hernandez, taking on Thiago Moises, and in a fight where Thiago Moises, mainly known for his jiu-jitsu, we saw in his last fight against Bobby Green, he decided to strike a little bit, mix it up with some of the takedowns, and he was able to get the win. Definitely didn't think he won that fight, but he was able to get the win nonetheless. He's on a 2-fight win streak. He beat Michael Johnson and Bobby Green, and those are two real, not legends of the division, but they're close to it. I mean, they put on some very good fights in their long, illustrious UFC career. So for Moises, a guy that's a former RFA lightweight champ, he's only 25 years old, almost 26, coming into this one, representing American Top Team. The sky's almost the limit, but nobody's really talking about him. Finally gets the opportunity against the guy that's kind of a lightning rod for controversy in Hernandez. Switch things up. Of course, we know he's moved over to Factory X. He had that loss against Drew Dober last year where it definitely didn't look good for him. He comes back out against old Grits, Chris Grutzmacher, and finishes him and looks amazing in that fight. And it's kind of been the story of Alexander Hernandez's UFC career. Where is this guy?
Exactly. Honestly, I'll be honest. I've been a little bit underwhelmed by his UFC career up until this point, but you have to understand where his where his career got started off at. He knocked out Dariush in a minute, and that's a really, really big, it wasn't only that Dariush, at that time he was ranked too, which means even more, but when you make a UFC debut like that, people are going to start talking about you. Then, of course, we know what happened in his third fight, I guess. He beats OAM, and the OAM fight, I thought he should look better against. Listen, it was a back and forth fight. It was pretty 50-50, honestly. Hernandez probably won 2 of the 3 rounds, don't get me wrong. But at the end of that fight, I don't really think he proved he was the better martial artist than Olivier Aubin-Mercier was. And then he fights Cowboy. And we all remember that fight. We remember the pre-fight press conferences, called him a bunch of mean names, and then he got head kicked and didn't look very good. But after that fight, you look at the career of Alexander Hernandez, and I thought the Cowboy loss was going to be one of those situations where you lose to one of the better guys in the division, you're going to go back, you're going to get better, and then the next time we see him, he's fighting at home in San Antonio against Masaranduba, Francisco Trinaldo, and he might have gotten the win in that fight, but if you're going to bring up the fact that Bobby Green probably beat Thiago Moises in that fight, which I do agree with, Francisco Trinaldo beat Alexander Hernandez in their fight as well, and I don't want to say it was home cooking or anything, but it was a little odd that it was in his hometown, and he did get a very close decision. But the thing with Hernandez is, you know he's got the power in his hands. You know he's got the wrestling. He feels like he's too excited to fight. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but you just see him in the way that he gets started. Alexander Hernandez loves to get off to a fast start, but the thing that always comes to mind is, remember when James Krause was under a lot of fire when when Anthony Smith had lost to Glover Teixeira because they said, oh, his corner's constantly yelling at him. They're making him think he has to do something. Hernandez kind of has that same vibe in the cage where from the second the fight goes, he feels like he always has to be doing something, and sometimes it makes him walk into big shots. Sometimes it makes him not the reserved fighter that he should be. And against Chris Grutzmacher, yeah, he looked phenomenal, but Chris Grutzmacher, I would say, is an entry-level UFC fighter. He's the type of guy who you normally give, oh, you're making your UFC debut.
Great hair, though.
Great hair, though, don't get me wrong. But listen, he beat Joe Lozon, who's basically at the end of his career. He has a TKO loss to Artem Lobov from The Ultimate Fighter. You kind of know what you're going to get with Chris.
Julian Rosa.
So does Julian Rosa, but you kind of know what you're going to get with Chris Grutzmacher. And honestly, Alexander Hernandez, in my mind at least, is quite a bit ahead of him in that fight. So you didn't learn a lot from the Grutzmacher fight. I think this is one of the more important fights of Alexander Hernandez's career because Thiago Moises, you mentioned, not a lot of people are talking about him, but the people who know that a win over him really means a lot. And if Hernandez, listen, he's got the personality, he's got the look. Maybe you don't like his personality, but people at least talk about Alexander Hernandez. And it's the old quote, listen, you pay to see me win or you pay to see me lose. Alexander Hernandez, people still watch him fight because they do want to see him lose. And if he can beat a guy like Thiago Moises, yes, to the broader MMA fan, it might not mean that much. But to the people watching this video, and especially to us, that means a lot. And that's how you get back on track to start fighting those guys in the top 15. But he better not go for a single takedown in this fight, and I will let you explain why.
If you look at Alexander Hernandez, he goes for a lot of takedowns. I mean, he goes for about 2 or so per fight. For Thiago Moises, 1.29 so far in his UFC career. I will say this. How does Thiago Moises lose? Well, he loses to very good strikers or very well-rounded fighters. Beneil Dariush, the example. Hernandez knocked him out. Moises lost the decision where he got outclassed. He did attempt a lot of submissions. That's the thing. This guy is a black belt to the nth degree, and if he gets you down, unless you're very adept at getting back up to your feet, or you're a really high-level wrestler like a Bobby Green is, then you're going to be able to get out of some of the bad situations. And for the fighters that he's taken down, he took down Kurt Holloway multiple times. He outstruck him. He was in position for the majority of that fight. He beat Gladson Kutis over on Brazilian Contender Series, and he looked really good. He had the knockdowns in that fight, and he was able to do things with his hands. That's the thing, man. This guy's scary, because once you get your hands going, and his wrestling's pretty good, and his jiu-jitsu's great, that's when there's a big problem. Like Gilbert Burns. Like, you have a big problem on your hands if the guy can bring it together. And he's only 25 years old, almost 26. And Hernandez, 28. He's got the power in his hands. His defensive wrestling isn't all that great. And so far in the UFC, we've seen him taken down by Cowboy Cerrone and OAM, and that's been about it so far. He himself was able to take down Drew Dober, which I like. But again, he got caught in that fight. He looked great against Gritzmacher, like we said, which you were kind of going to come to expect. So the numbers are really difficult to look at. Moises gets cracked quite a bit. In the fight against Demirs Magulov, it was kind of like a wet blanket. He got outstruck, and everything just kind of went in favor of his Magulov. And I'd like to see Demirs Magulov fighting more, but in a fight like this, it is tricky. It's tough to kind of get a great read on it. So let's look at the odds and the votes first, and then we'll kind of give our final analysis. The odds in this one, Hernandez open to -140, now -193 favorite. For Thiago Moises, open to +120 underdog. He's now at a +159. If you look at the total Tapology votes, decent sample size so far, 826 total votes, 70% going with Hernandez, 63% by decision. I think Hernandez can win a decision. But if you went back and watched the fight that Bobby Green had, Bobby Green outstruck Thiago Moises, and I thought he won that fight, not from pillar to post, but I thought he won that fight. 11 of 15 total MMA media members over on MMA Decisions had Bobby Green to win that fight as well. So I was very surprised that Green didn't win that fight. For Hernandez, you got to strike with volume, and you have to strike to make it count. You can't just be darting in and out, moving, and just making it look like you're doing something. You got to start cracking Moises. For Moises, you just got to kind of last the fight. I mean, you got to follow. You got to kind of lash. You got to kind of wear on Hernandez. Fight the fight that Olivier Aubert-Mercier fought, and that might be a path to victory. If he tries to just do volume against Hernandez, he's probably going to get cracked. So for me, again, I have Hernandez in this fight, but Moises has passed the victory. He's good at wrestling. If Hernandez's takedown defense isn't on point for this one, and we've seen him training with a lot of high-level fighters with Factory X. I know I had it in my notes. We've had a couple of Factory X fighters. Vince Cachero is one of them. Chris Gutierrez is another one. So a lot of guys that can kind of somewhat emulate Thiago Moises as far as striking and the takedowns are concerned, but it's really hard to find somebody with the jiu-jitsu of Moises, so that's what makes this a very interesting fight.
It's a tough fight to predict, it really is, and to me, it does come down to the wrestling between these two. Hernandez is the better pure wrestler. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. The thing is, Thiago Moises has, and I like that you brought up the Cerrone fight. Here's the thing with the Cerrone fight. Cerrone did take down Hernandez, but Hernandez popped right back up to his feet. And the other thing about Cowboy is, people forget, Cowboy is one of the better MMA wrestlers out there. Like, yeah, he doesn't have the background, but you just talk about strict MMA wrestling, Cowboy Cerrone can get pretty much anyone to the ground. Like, he's got a really nice double leg. So I don't think getting taken down by Cowboy Cerrone is the end of the world by any means, but I do think it's an important point that you brought up. If Moises does take Hernandez down, it will be over. And I do think this fight, it'll be kind of similar to the Michael Johnson fight. You look at the first round of the Michael Johnson fight, Moises lands one punch and gets completely outclassed. And I'll be honest, I remember watching that fight thinking Michael Johnson was going to win. And at the end of that first round, my confidence was pretty high. I'm like, wow, he defended a takedown attempt. He looked good on the feet. Like, this is the real Michael Johnson. And then you see how good Moises is on the ground. It's always that X factor. When you have those Thiago Moises, Antonio Carlos Jr., I understand he's no longer in the UFC, but you get it. Just guys who are that level of a black belt, you're never safe on the ground with them. So Hernandez, I like him on the feet. I think he does have the slightly better wrestling. I think he's got underrated cardio too. I do like his output because I talked about the OAM fight and how it was a close fight. It was a grueling fight though. It really was. And the fact that Hernandez was still somewhat fresh by the third round. It was just back and forth scrambles and top control and wrestling. He showed off pretty good gas tank in that fight. So I think Hernandez can defend enough takedowns to keep this fight on the feet. Probably get it done by decision, but this is a really exciting fight.
I love the fight. We're both going with Alexander, the great Alexander Hernandez, to get the win. It should be a great fight on a great card. Of course, you got Cyril Gane taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik in our main events. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it.